I wanted to get an update on a story that we followed pretty closely from the beginning, even in its development stage and the reluctance to actually make it happen. I'm talking about the inquiry into foreign interference in our elections, right? Well, today in Ottawa, we're expecting top brass from Canada's intelligence agencies and foreign service to address the inquiry. Yesterday, former Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole testified. It was pretty interesting. He said he was shocked on election night back in 2021 when his party started to do far worse. As the numbers started to come in, they were doing far worse than they had expected to perform that night. And according to O'Toole, the party had identified 9 ridings where they were concerned about possible interference. And as the results came in, he suspected that voter suppression might be at play here, and things weren't working out the way they had predicted. Now, to his undying credit, and I honestly genuinely appreciate this. He said, listen, it wouldn't have changed the outcome of the election. I would not be prime minister based on what we saw and what we were anticipating. He says I might still be leader, though. It might have changed my own personal fortunes, but he's not trying to say that the election was stolen or any of that nonsense. But he's saying, we could see that something didn't go right. And we've heard testimony from other MPs who feel that they were, their campaigns were manipulated in some way or other. So regardless, doesn't matter. Any meddling in a Canadian election, doesn't matter what party you belong to, should concern you. Any amount is too much. So how are we doing so far, and where are we headed from here? We're going to speak with Andrew Kirsch, who is a former intelligence officer with CSIS and the author of I Was Never Here. Andrew, thanks so much for joining us again. Always appreciate your time.
Yes, thanks for having me back.
So this foreign interference inquiry, we're now a week or two into it. Give us your reaction to what we've seen so far. What stands out? Are we going anywhere with this?
Well, I hope so. I mean, it's been a long road to get here.
Yeah, it has.
We had one to get an inquiry. We had the special rapporteur, and then this final push to have an inquiry. And I think, unfortunately, we've lost some momentum from those early days when we were just getting this information leaked in the newspapers, which, we talked before, I don't agree with leaking, but we had some real momentum around trying to understand what exactly happened in our elections. And once again, to reiterate, I don't think there's anyone who suggests that the outcomes were not the way it was going to go, and that the final result wasn't going to be this government, but that there may have been some interference in specific ridings that could have gotten to changed a bit of the outcome, or at least influenced in some way. And it's really hard to know how much or what happened. They were talking about that they were surprised with the outcomes, that maybe it was not what they expected. Well, it's hard enough to know why somebody did vote. It's extremely hard to know why someone didn't. We're talking about voter suppression, and who didn't show up to vote because of potential interference or things that people are talking about that may or may not have happened. Very hard to get to the bottom of. So I hope we're starting to at least ask these questions. And in my mind, the important questions are, what did people know about what was happening? And did we make the appropriate decisions with the information that we had? Because, in order to understand, one, if we made the appropriate decisions, we have to figure out who had the information,
right?
And was it the right people to make decisions? We heard the other day about how the parties were saying, well, we wish we knew. We wish someone had told us that maybe there were some things going on, that they felt they did not have all the information they needed to kind of mitigate the risk. And now we're hearing some of the parties saying, hey, we were also not advised, or our concerns were dismissed. And maybe that wasn't appropriate. Maybe they should have been provided a little more information, if not just to substantiate what happened, or to have a conversation to say, well, what did you see? This is what we saw, and get a little more information out. And I hope that's what's going to start coming out of this process is, an understanding of the risk, of the threat. This is not new. This is something that CSIS has been mandated to investigate since 1984. This foreign interference is a core part of the mandate, but now we're seeing it materialize, especially with online stuff. Things are very hard to track. Well, do we have the tools to investigate it, and most importantly, are we getting that information to our decision makers, and are we Are we confident that they are making the appropriate decisions with that information?
And Andrew, I think, you make a really good point. Prior to today, we've heard from people who you could call, I guess, victims, or people who sort of were targets of this foreign interference. Like I say, MPs, politicians, Aaron O'Toole. Today it's switching, and we're supposed to hear from leaders of the intelligence agencies. So we might get into what you're talking about today. At least that's what I'm anticipating. These are the people that would have the answers to those questions you're asking, which essentially boil down to who knew what and when, right?
Well, absolutely. This has come up before. We had previous CSIS director Fadden had made a very public speech about foreign interference. What was that, 2015? I'm trying to remember the date, where he said that the service, that CSIS is concerned about foreign governments and foreign interference in our democratic processes and with elected officials. And he was kind of summarily slapped down, and people said, you can't say that, and this, we haven't really talked about it since. And so I'm hoping that today we'll get another, or in the days to come, kind of frank conversations about what CSIS is seeing, and maybe perhaps recommendations they've made, or where they see we can improve, or maybe additional tools that they need. But once again, I hope this inquiry isn't just talking about the threat, because we're aware of the threat. CSIS has been investigating the threat. People who need to know about this should know about it. So I do hope they get into, and this is what we've been saying, and this is kind of who we talk to about this, and are those the appropriate people? And is there some sort of, in their estimation, did we do enough with the information that we had?
And Andrew, I don't know, as you know, this inquiry is broken up into a couple of different phases, and that's supposed to be the next phase. It's supposed to be taking a look at the government's abilities to detect, counteract interference. I think that's going to be the more important part of this inquiry. That won't start until the summer. I think it's June that phase of it's supposed to kick off. But I think that's when we're going to really get into, hey, as a country, put the politics aside, put the politicians aside. What are we doing as a country to protect ourselves and our democracy? That's the important piece here, right?
Well, that's part of it, but I'd say in some ways that's the part that almost has to be secret. We talk about CSIS' sources and methods, and you're hearing a lot of things that are coming up about conversations that maybe CSIS had access to, and other kind of investigative methods. We're getting more insight into that than I'm sure that the government is comfortable with. They really take pains to protect sources and methods and sources of intelligence. What I think the real core issue is that there are allegations brought up through the leaking of information that this information was provided to the government, that there was interference and election meddling in our democracy, and that the assertion was not much was done with it. That these charges, allegations warranted some additional measures that were not either taken seriously, or that the government's actions with that information was not appropriate. And I think that's, as I said, what I would like to see is okay, well, what did they know? And did they act? That's the public nature of it, right? It's because we have a government that receives information, and the allegation was that they had benefited from it. And so, did they take the steps that they should have or needed to, and were there any limitations to doing that? And I think that's the restoring the confidence in our democracy is the public. The reason we kind of want to see some of this done publicly, because the only reason we know about it is through leaks. This was not something that was kind of created or readily presented. And then there might be some sensitive conversations about the tools we need and some of the threats, because we don't want to give that information to our adversaries, right? We obviously don't want to tell them, this is what we're missing and this is what we're seeing in a public way. We have to protect that to some degree, and I wonder how much they're going to be able to share about that for those very reasons. I'm really interested in the flow of information, where this went, who got to see it, if there were bottlenecks, if there are problems in the process. If people were not provided this, then they can't be held accountable for the decisions they made because they didn't have all the information.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
if they did, maybe what prevented them from steps to counter it. And look, foreign interference is very difficult. It is a gray area, as I said. How do we know why people voted, why they didn't, what is state-sponsored, what is just individuals who are acting and participating in our democracy? It's rarely black and white. So it is a challenge, and that's what I'm hoping we're seeing a little bit more of, that people are aware of the threat and the nuances for countering it. But let's restore some faith in democracy. As I said, it's allegations that people are meddling, and that any amount of that is a problem. Yes, 9, whatever the seats were that there was identified, but what if the next election comes down to fewer seats? That's really the concern and the risk. But every seat is important, and every riding should be protected. But there is an impact on our overall democracy when this happens.
Last one, and I'll let you go. This first phase is supposed to wrap up less than a week. I think it's next Wednesday is supposed to be the last day of this initial phase. And then we get the initial report back beginning of May. Prime Minister is on the docket. He is supposed to be involved in this first phase before it wraps up next week. I'm not anticipating much, if anything, to come out of that phase. Are you? Is that something you're looking forward to, or is that not that important at the end of the day?
Well, I think any time we see, and we've seen recently in the Emergencies Act, I forget the official name of that, when the Prime Minister had a chance to speak and address, any time we can hear from our elected officials, when we get a sense into their decision-making process, the information they received, why they made the decisions they made, I think that's great. I think that's very helpful, very clarifying, to get people an opportunity to get on the record and share their views. So I don't know what will come out of it.
Yeah, right.
But I think it's a great the transparency. I'm all for, and getting that perspective as well. We really don't see that all the time, and we only get. The problem with the leaks is that we've had the selective leaking of information, right? That is not a complete picture of what happened. And we have an individual who has taken upon themselves to put information into public, information that they deem important and necessary. But that is not the complete picture. And so this is really an opportunity to fill in some of the gaps, to create a more full picture of what happened, why decisions were made, who had what information, and that is where this is extremely valuable exercise, and I am looking forward to it. What will come out of it, I don't know, but I think anytime, like I said, we can have these opportunities to talk about our national security, to have those decision makers weigh in, is extremely helpful, because it affects us all. This is a problem. It's a bipartisan, cross-partisan issue. It's not one level of government versus another. It's not one party or another. And so it's something we all need to take seriously. And so I'm excited, hopeful that we are, and we will.
Excellent. Andrew, great stuff. Thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it, as always.
Well, thank you for having me.
Hi, it's Shauna, and I might be a bad parent because my kids think French fries are vegetables.
Hey, it's Ryan, and I might be a bad parent because I went out for wings when my wife was in the hospital after giving birth.
Johnny here. I might be a bad parent because in my house, the tooth fairy gives pocket change.
But we're not alone. Len emailed us and said his 6-year-old daughter's Tarzan moment going from love seat to lazy boy by curtains made him more proud than any dance recital.
And Andy left his 2-year-old at the rink. All right, guys, I'm sure we're not alone. Like Andy's kid.
For stories and confessions like this, make sure you check out our podcast.
It's called Bad Parents, and it's available wherever you get your podcasts.
I left a glove at the rink.